when we start up Visual Studio 2019, you should see this getting started screen pop up first. Are you guys seeing that, or is it asking you a question or something because you haven't used it yet? All right, so what we're going to do in this first time that we use Visual Studio, let's create a new project. So I'm going to choose that create a new project. With Visual Studio Code, you guys have done such a great job entering those terminal commands to create a new project. With a full Visual Studio, it's a little bit more graphical. We don't have to enter a command, but we do have to make sure we find the right template. So let's search through all of our templates for console applications. Oops. And I do find several. I want to make sure I'm using templates that are C#. Notice I have some Visual Basic and C++ and JavaScript templates that popped up there as options too. But I just want to use C#, and I want to use the C# console application. Let's see. We can use this one that is Core or the one that's .NET Framework. As long as we all choose the same one, we'll be in good shape. Let's choose this .NET Framework and click Next. Once we choose our template, we can give our project a name and a storage location. I'll name this Visual Studio Project. And what we're going to have here with Visual Studio is not only will we create a project named First Visual Studio Project, it's also going to set our namespace to that same thing. And we could actually change that and override it if we wanted to on this setup screen. But I'm going to go ahead and leave them the same and click Create. Notice that our framework for Visual Studio or .NET is here. We could choose a different version, kind of like we do in our terminal command. My location is set to a location on the C drive. That's okay for right now. We'll talk a lot more about that on Wednesday. Now, the first Visual Studio project here that I got created looks a lot. Our code is just the same, right? So you see your program.cs file. What's different is all the stuff around it. So let's look at some of the Visual Studio things before we get too worried about our code. First of all, in the center here, we have our code window that we're looking at. And notice it has a tab up here at the top. And I could close this tab if I wanted to, or do other things with it. Visual Studio has many, many different windows, and they're all kind of movable. So we'll see how the industry evolves with all of these things, because Visual Studio Code is much less graphical than Visual Studio is. It's kind of a weird thing. Now in Visual Studio Code, we were used to, over here on the left, having our file list and all of our different options. And with Visual Studio, it's a little different. We have different windows that show us those different things. So over here on the right, by default, is my Solution Explorer. So my Solution Explorer window is the one that shows me all of my files and folders for my project. So here's my program.cs file that I'm looking at, all that stuff. Now, the Solution Explorer window is sitting over here, and that's kind of its default spot. I want to move it. Let's move it around. Come to the top of the Solution Explorer window, the title bar, and click and hold, and that'll grab that window. Notice how you can drag it and relocate it within Visual Studio. So if you're like, well, I liked it over here on the left, you can use this toolbar here in the middle to decide exactly where you want to put this window. Like I want it to be at the top and kind of blocked in, or I want it to be right in this middle section. But once you decide on a location, you can drop it, or you can move it manually yourself to get it to a location. So however you want to do it is fine. Now my Solution Explorer here ended up right beside my code window. That's fine. I could move it if I don't like it there. I could minimize it if I wanted to, because it's its own little window. What does this push pin thing do? So if I use the push pin to auto hide, now my Solution Explorer is minimized, but I have a tab over here to reopen it. Okay, so if I want to keep it open all the time again, I can pin it again, and now it's going to stay open. So that's an option that we have for all of the different Visual Studio windows. So you can pin or auto hide, or however whichever term you want to use, that window, and then it will become a tab in the location you have it. Now if I want to move it back over here to where it was originally, I can do that. I made it huge, didn't I? I don't want it to be that big. Kind of want to drop it right here on top of this one that I've already got. So they're there. Now I've got these two windows side by side. That's not like what I wanted at all. And when I mess around with Visual Studio, I can really get things everywhere, all over the place. And that's okay. This is why programmers or developers have 4 monitors, right? Because I can take my Solution Explorer and move that window off to one of my other monitors if I want to. Or I could take my code window and move it off to another monitor. So that's why I have this option of moving all of the different tools around and being able to be really productive in Visual Studio. Now my properties in my Solution Explorer are tabs now. Instead of being split in half, that's fine. If I get Visual Studio so messed up I can't find anything, I can use the window menu and I can reset the window layout. And if I reset the window layout, it'll say, are you sure you want to restore the default? Yep. That'll put all of the windows back to where they were originally. So you can mess with it and try getting it laid out just the way you want it to be. And if you have something that gets all messed up, you can reset it. Now, if my Solution Explorer gets closed, because I used this little X and closed that window, how can I find it to get it back? Solution Explorer is really important.
Yeah, it's still on the left.
Do what?
It's still on the left.
Still on the left? No, it isn't. It's Server Explorer. That's a different one.
Maybe
So
View.
maybe View. View's usually good. Ah, there it is, right at the top, my Solution Explorer. So View is important. When I look at my View menu, notice there are so many different explorers. That Server Explorer's name looks just like Solution Explorer. That's why it looked like there was a tab open. And we have a lot of different windows that we can use within Visual Studio. So you can kind of see, like with Visual Studio Code, they were eliminating some of the complexity, right? By making everything just use those same windows. We don't have as many features. So it's a little simpler, but maybe a little easier to use. All right, so let's get Visual Studio going here. I'm looking at my program.cs file. What if it gets closed and I want to edit my program.cs file? Well, I have to find Solution Explorer, and in Solution Explorer then I can double click on my program.cs file to open it up again. One of the biggest things that happens with beginning users in Visual Studio is if they open a project and the CS file doesn't open automatically for whatever reason, they don't think the project has opened. You go to Solution Explorer, find your project, and then you should be able to find your CS file. Let's add a Readline statement to this so it does something. Notice they didn't give us the default Hello World application, so we'll have to make it ourselves. Let's just do console.writeline hello world. So we can run this in Visual Studio. Now in Visual Studio, our start button up here at the top will run. We can also use F5 like we did in Visual Studio Code. That's fine too. I'm going to go ahead and run this. And you might have seen a quick flash of like a console window. That was the console opening and closing. If I press Control F5 to run, my console window will stay open, and then I can see my output message. So that's a little different than Visual Studio Code also, because in Visual Studio Code, we just see our output in our messages area. But with Visual Studio, it actually opens a command prompt window and shows us our output. Little different, not too much, but a little bit different. Now let's make an error here so we can see what will happen or how we'll look at our errors. Got a problem. I got rid of my semicolon. It's giving me the red squiggly right there to let me know, but I want to go ahead and try to run it so I can see the error message. Now when I have errors, I'll get this message, there were build errors, but no, I never usually want to run, because that means I'm going to run an old version of my program. So I'll say no. And then I got to find my error. Looking down here, I see that I've got my output window, but it's not showing me any information about my errors. Right above it, however, if you notice the status bar, it does have this red X, and it says you can click here to look at the error list. Now there's my error where it says a semicolon was expected. And way over here is my line number. So it does give us the same information as we've seen with Visual Studio Code, just in a little bit different of a format. Everybody see that okay? Now, what if we want to debug it? We've seen that debugger is very, very helpful. We usually need to set a breakpoint. To set a breakpoint, I can right-click on the line of code I'm sitting on and set a breakpoint. Or I can come over here to this gray bar area and click, and that will set a breakpoint also. Now that I've got my breakpoint set, I can start running, and I'll automatically be running the debugger. Now the debugger does look a little different. It still highlights the line of code that we've set our breakpoint at in yellow. Down here at the bottom of the screen, though, we see our variables and all of our data in these windows down at the bottom. So just, again, a little bit different of a format than what we were used to looking at with Visual Studio Code. So in my debugger, if I want to step into my code, my toolbar is up here at the top when the debugger starts running, and I have my step into, step over, and step out. So kind of the same options. Then I'm going to stop debugging. When I am done with Visual Studio, I'll usually be prompted if I want to save, but sometimes I need to save on my own. if you look at your file menu, you'll see that we have different save options. If I just did a Control S to save, I would only save my changes to my program.cs file. Visual Studio might have made changes to other files behind the scenes that I don't know about, so I should always use Save All. That's going to save my changes and any behind the scenes Visual Studio changes. And then I can close this project. I'm going to close this whole thing, close solution, so I can open one of the projects we created using Visual Studio Code. Now, they give me the option to open a project or solution. Let's choose it. I'm going to open an existing project, and I'm going to navigate to my source code folder that I've created for our class, if I can find it. And let's see, I think I'll go chapter 2, we had a few. So in chapter 2, I have a couple of projects. I have this basics one and this console input one. I'm going to try to open this basics project in Visual Studio. Visual Studio wants a solution file. We don't have a solution file in these projects we've created with Visual Studio Code. So we're going to need to open using the project file instead. So I'm going to open that. Now, once I open it, it didn't open any code window for me. So I have to find my Solution Explorer. And looking at my Solution Explorer, I can double click on my program.cs to see that code. It's another hello world. How convenient. But I am able to find it. Now, here's the project file that I opened, the basics. See how it's got the C# logo? That shows me that that's my CS proj file. So we actually can see that file and edit it in Visual Studio Code. In Visual Studio, it's kind of hiding it from us. But the whole thing is part of this solution. So let's do a save all. Save all. Now, when I do the save all, it pops up and says, where do you want me to put this solution file? I should have one in this project, and I don't, because I created this project in Visual Studio Code. So I'm just going to tell Visual Studio to save that solution file right there in my project folder. That's fine. And now I'm going to try to close this again. Yes, I want to save everything. Now I want to open a project again. And I'm going to open that same one with my basics. Now that I look at it, and I've already updated it in Visual Studio, now I have a solution file, the SLN, and that's the one that I want to use from now on in Visual Studio. If I open this project again in Visual Studio Code, it would ignore that solution file. But Visual Studio likes that file to keep all the pieces put together. So you should still be able to load any project that you've already worked on in code, open it in Visual Studio, and you should be able to copy and paste, again, any code that you've created in Replit, just in the same way you've done with Visual Studio Code. So we'll explore it more next time as we're looking at TFS, but it's a great opportunity for you to start using this tool. When you're a software developer, They will give you tools that you have access to help you make your job easier. You'll find as you work that some developers will take advantage of that, and they'll be like, oh, I need to learn how to use this tool. And in like a day or two, they'll be experts. They'll know everything about that thing. A salesman comes in to try to give them more advice about it. Your developers on staff will be saying, no, that's not how it works. It does it this way, because they've already figured it all out. Other people on the staff will wait, and they'll be like, well, I'm real busy right now. I don't have time to learn any new tools. I've just got to keep working on what I'm working on and get it done. So the developer that figures out how that tool works is going to now be leaps ahead of that other guy. Because not only did he take a few minutes to figure out how this tool works, he can start using it to save time. That's why the company bought it. So he knows how it works. He's going to be able to save time using it, and he's going to continue to do well with the company. We have to get familiar with our tools. Sometimes we have training for those tools. Sometimes we just have to figure things out on our own. When you're working with Visual Studio, I'll try and help you as much as possible. But again, it's a tool that you want to start exploring and start learning as much as you can about, so that you know how to use it on your own. One thing that we've seen a lot of is the console.readline thing. And you saw that in some early replets, and it was like, take that out, it's causing trouble. We didn't even need it with Visual Studio Code. Well, with Visual Studio, remember, if I just press F5 to run, it's going to open that console screen and then just close it real fast on me. But if I add a readline statement, now my console screen will open, display my output, and the readline statement will make it hang there and stay open until the user presses enter, and that will finish it. So that's why we saw readline statements in a lot of our early code, because that keeps that console window open when we're working with Visual Studio. We saw with Visual Studio Code it wasn't necessary, and it caused trouble in Replit. But now I can finally explain to you why it was there for all of those others. Questions before we go? As you're looking at things, is there something that I'm leaving out that is a big question right off the top of your head? Well, you're going to run into some, I'm sure, so kind of keep track of them and let me know. So before Wednesday, make sure you finish up that project 2 that we were working on together. Make sure you get the Unit 2 exam done, and then Wednesday we'll start with TFS and looking at exception handling. There's no questions. I'm going to end our Teams meeting. You guys have a great day. I'll see you Wednesday.